It's been predicted that by the year 2044, there is a 75% chance that LA will incur an earthquake at the 7.1 level. A lot of buildings need to be retrofitted here in Los Angeles. And to explain what buildings need to be retrofitted and how that whole process is taking place, I am delighted to welcome Chief Building Inspector Jeff Napier of the LA Department of Building and Safety. So nice to have you with me.
Hi, Maria. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thanks. All right. There is an ordinance on the books that was put in 2015 that is called the Mandatory Earthquake Hazard Reduction in Existing Wood Frame Buildings with Soft, Weak, or Open Front Doors. That's a lot of words. What does that mean?
Yeah, that is. Okay, so for the layperson, you see these older apartment buildings all throughout the city with little poles holding up the upper stories. Those are typically what we would call a soft story building. Okay. The definition is 2 stories of wood frame construction with an open, let's say, tuck under parking, right? Or a similar space underneath with open wall lines where we don't have the proper shear paneling and supports to resist the forces of lateral forces in an earthquake. So these are buildings that were designed prior to the building codes of January 1st, 1978. They consist of 2 or more stories of wood framing, and they are 3 units or less are exempt from the program. But that in a nutshell is what these buildings are.
So what happens to these buildings in an earthquake that requires an ordinance to have been passed?
So we all know in the Northridge earthquake, these types of buildings did not perform very well. The forces that hit, the buildings were designed to support the vertical loads of the building, but they were not necessarily designed for the lateral or the horizontal forces of an earthquake. So the buildings, top heavy, create a little bit of momentum, and they collapsed onto the lower stories. There were quite a significant loss of life in that earthquake. The building code has adapted, and these buildings need to be upgraded so that they can withstand these forces.
Okay, so that's considered a soft story, but there's this other thing called an open front wall. Is that literally the same building, or is it a different type of building?
Yeah, so what you're looking at when we say an open wall line, so imagine a whole bunch of posts in a row. Normally in today's code, we would see what we would call shear walls, or walls that would fill in those voids, right? And those resist the lateral forces in a greater capacity. When you have an open wall line, that means that it's literally a row of posts with spaces in between. Those spaces are vulnerable, or the connections from the post to the upper stories are very vulnerable. So what we're doing now is we're strengthening those buildings to absorb those forces.
Okay, so what is the ordinance? What was the ordinance, and what's the time frame? Because there's a huge window, of time that people are able to comply with this.
Right. So the ordinance, what happens if you're to receive an order to comply from the department? That means your building was one of the almost 13,000 buildings in the city that was identified as being
potentially at risk.
Yeah, potentially at risk. Let's put it that way. So you would receive an order to comply. At that point, what the ordinance says is that you have to hire an engineer or an architect licensed in the state of California to perform a structural analysis of the building. That structural analysis will address those connections and whether the building can withstand another earthquake. If the building was built okay as is, those plans are submitted to our department and we'll review that and you'll be okay. Most of the time, these buildings are going to require plans are submitted with a retrofit component to strengthen these buildings up. The public has, or the building owner I should say, has 2 years in which to submit the plans to the department. Within 3.5 years, they have to obtain the permits to either start the construction or demolish the building, and 7 years to ultimately fully comply.
So what is normally required to retrofit one of these soft story buildings?
In a nutshell, what happens is the contractor comes in, they put in temporary supports to support the upper floors because the weakness is on the lower floor where the tuck under parking, the typical tuck under parking, if you will, is. What they then do is start to do the excavations for the big concrete beam that has to go underneath. Once they get that in place, they call for inspection. There's certain stages of construction that require inspection. It also requires special inspection where we have what we call deputy inspectors that are on site during the construction for quality control. The grade beam is poured. This is what the big concrete foundation is. Big, huge steel I-beams go into the ground. The concrete surrounds those to give you a nice tight connection at the bottom. As you come up, there's a cross member that connects to it. It's welded, bolted, put into place. This is a real nice stiff frame now, if you will, that won't allow the building to shift as much back and forth. Though that element is then connected to the floors above. So the good part about it is the tenants usually aren't, significantly impacted. Of course, there's always the noise
Sure.
and the dust that goes with it.
But they don't have to move.
In
most
most
of the
cases,
time.
in most
Okay.
cases, yeah. I'm sure not in every case. There is a tenant habitability plan that is submitted to the department, to the housing department's guidelines, HCID-LA, Housing Community Investment Department. They have to notify their tenants in writing that there's going to be some construction going on, and they have to provide measures to lessen the effect of the construction for the tenants.
Can you find out yourself, if you're just a tenant, if one of these buildings is on the list that needs to be retrofitted?
Absolutely, you can. You can go on our website, ladbs.org. You would click on the link under the Permit and Inspection Activity Report.
Okay.
In there, you can type in your address. You got to make sure you have the right address. It will bring up information as to whether or not your building is in the program, one, whether or not it's been issued an order to comply and the status of that order, and then third, whether or not it's in full compliance, which means it's received a certificate of compliance.
Is there an opportunity for people to be able to virtually have their properties inspected?
Yeah, there sure is. We have a new program called the Virtual Inspection Program. It's fairly new. It's just sort of taking off, and it allows us, an innovative way for our customers and our inspection staff to obtain timely inspections and, lessen the person-to-person contact. Now, obviously, these are going to be sort of your simpler inspections. This doesn't mean that a 20-story building can be inspected from an office in downtown LA.
Right.
These are going to be smaller ticket items, window replacements, location of smoke detectors. Sometimes the contractor will get a correction. These will be re-inspections of a simple correction that instead of putting an inspector in the car, getting out on the road, it allows us to do a really quick inspection through a real-time live streaming.
So you can actually
camera.
talk them,
you
talking
talk
them
them through.
around.
Exactly. I get a lot of questions from people just in my everyday passings that say, gosh, it must be really hard to get a permit. I want to do this addition to my house, but I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. I can't walk in and get a permit. Well, you certainly can. So we've put safeguards in place to protect the public and our staff, that they can come in, drop their plans off at our drop-off centers. For the soft story program, you would need to do that at our Metro office located just down the road at 201 North Figueroa Street.
Okay.
For any other permit, you can go to any of our permit issuing offices. There they'll drop their plans, they'll be given an appointment date. Okay, and on that appointment date, and after a brief quarantine of the plans, we usually quarantine the plans for 24 to 48 hours, one of our staff will call the applicant back and start the plan check process. A little bit of back and forth with corrections and emails and things of that nature. You can obtain your permit. Like we said, we have the virtual inspection program running at this time. You can schedule your inspections through our website or through the 311 operator. So, we've faced a lot of challenges during the pandemic, but we've been able to move forward through it. So that's been really good.
All right, so the website for information?
ladbs.org is the website. It's very user-friendly. It's wonderful. I get a lot of feedback from just friends and colleagues that I know. They say it's really easy to navigate. They're really happy with it. You can find pretty much everything we do on that website. You can schedule inspections. You can monitor and follow the progress of your inspections on that site. And there's many other things on there. Virtual inspections is on there.
Well, thank you so much for clarifying and sharing with me all of the information about a whole array of terminology that I had never heard of before. It's
You're
been a
welcome.
great education.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this LA Current.